All right, in the end, I decided I would actually do this chapter for slides, just basically because they do have some terminology there that I want to make sure that we get, and then you can kind of compare this if you want to the previous slides and see areas that I just didn't really get a chance to talk to. Again, I don't like reading the slides to you guys all that much, so there may be some areas that just kind of zoom through, but enough's enough with the preamble. The point here, I did want to talk a little bit more about user interface design, right? And again, how to basically really kind of focus on human-centered design or user-centered design. All right, and then what are the rules for successful, and then some kind of the issues that surround putting stuff in and getting stuff out. I didn't talk at all in my last video about reports, for example, things coming actually out of a user interface, which is odd, as that's one of my deals with a business intelligence guy. Of course, I'd be interested in reporting. It's sort of a high-level view on reporting here, but there's some good stuff to take from that. All right, and then definitely talking about things like the controls and security behind that. So let's get into this. So the goal of system design, right, to build a system effective, reliable, and maintainable. So one of the things I think about when I think about this, we're moving now from what used to be systems analysis to now system design. If you actually had your books with you, you'd notice that we're now actually in the blue section. So we've actually moved into the next phase. And so they're talking here about a system being effective if it basically supports the business and meets the needs, which you think would support the business. It's reliable and that can handle stuff wrong that's happening in there, stuff that's wrong when it goes in, something that's wrong in the various processing. The hardware itself is failing, which is more of a couple chapters, I think, down the road. And then of course, you've got to be ready for humans to make mistakes. So you got effective in supporting a business, reliable, and then this idea of maintainable. After you build a system, no matter how great it is, it's going to need maintenance, and easily 2/3 of the system's life cycle is maintenance, right? Most of the students, when they come out of their colleges, you guys have all been geared to creating things, and that's wonderful. But I'll tell you, your first job when you go into an IT place is likely going to be to fix something that's already there and that's broken. That's almost always what you're going to be doing up front, is you got maintenance. Because then what happens is through maintenance, you learn a lot about the business processes, the system processes, and then eventually from there you can start developing. All right. I mean, that might not be true to you, but that certainly has been my experience. So, will it succeed? So, this idea here of when you build a system, you've got to think like an actual user. So basically, don't think like you're thinking. Think like a user. Think like someone who's going to use your system. For the Dignity Center application, one of the things I was thinking about when I was designing my form is I was thinking that the most likely the people inputting the data were going to be retired senior citizens. And that went into a lot about how I thought I should develop the form within the limits of the technology that I actually had. And you got to anticipate stuff that's going to happen in the future, and then you basically have to sort of maintain or manage, this data. So this is for me, this is a very important idea. You want to make sure the data going into the system is as good as possible, as early as possible. If you wait and let garbage go in, this is a phenomenon called garbage in, garbage out. It makes my job on the other end, the business intelligence end, a lot harder, right? A lot harder. And I got to tell you, if you were looking in the background or under the hood of most of the systems we've designed in business intelligence, there's a huge amount dedicated to fixing stuff because the data wasn't verified or validated as it was coming in. They just allowed garbage to come in. They allowed garbage to come in. It's not their fault. They weren't being lazy. They made a tactical decision here. Do you want to basically stop the transaction happening because of the garbage data, or do you want basically this transaction to get in as far as possible and then fix it on the other end? And in a lot of sales-oriented applications, they are hungry to get this transaction in and through. And I got to tell you, they aren't necessarily thinking about keeping the data clean. They just salespeople by nature are small time scope people. They just basically want to get it done as quick as possible. So anyway, so this system here should basically enter and verify the data as soon as possible. 100%. The input data should be close to its source. 100%. I guess in this case we're talking about basically the data basically being. I'm trying to think what directions are. I don't know. I don't know what we're talking about there. I'll just leave it. But the other day here too, audit trails, right? A lot of data I dealt with was financial, so I certainly had to track changes in that data. All right, so here they're talking now about the chapter where we're going to talk about basically effectively all the stuff surrounding the concern about data coming into a system. So a user interface. So one of the easiest, earliest ones that was talked about was the Google interface. The Google interface was remarkably simple. Even now it's simple, but it was really simple back then. It literally was a web page with a search text box and a go button. I mean, that was totally centered around keeping things really easy for the users to deal with. So we're talking here about basically user system design, right? User system design. Now, there is a whole organization out there, the HCI organization, and that center all around this idea of human-computer interaction. We're all, victims of it through our cell phones or iPads. You could argue even driving a car. When you're sitting inside of the car, the steering wheel, the gas, the brake, the clutch, for those of you lucky enough still to be on manual systems, the gear shaft. These are all parts of the interface between the human and the car. And now when you're thinking about the interface between you and the system in the computer world, we're looking at keyboards, we're looking at mice, we're looking at touch screens, we're looking at the camera that I'm talking in right now. I mean, things that basically are meant to basically smooth the interaction between the human and the computer, and also not be a distraction. Have you ever had to work on a system and you think you know what's going on, and all of a sudden a pop-up happens, and that, especially that pop-up happens underneath another window, and you don't know why the system isn't working anymore? You could argue that's a very bad interface, and it certainly does distract me from what I'm trying to do. I'm not using your system because I like your system. I'm using your system because I want to basically do whatever the process was that the system models. And so anything that distracts me from getting that goal accomplished is a bad thing. Back to that earlier video when I designed that thing for the Dignity Center. I'm trying to make the entry of a client as smooth as possible and not completely derail the process or distract users by having unnecessary pop-ups or things all of a sudden start changing on the screen. You've probably seen this before. This is considered a no-no, even though people do it now. When you click on, maybe you're typing in something and you click on a little button beside, and all of a sudden another part of the window changes on you, and now you're looking at something else. Now, Windows does that all the time. Certainly the Office does. The filter, let's bring that up because that irritates me. So here's the filter. So as I basically click along this, you'll notice that, right, all this stuff starts changing, all this stuff. Now, I've grown to expect that the ribbon will keep changing, but in the beginning when that came out, that was considered kind of bad, right? I mean, in the beginning, what was supposed to happen, and the way earlier versions were, you click on design and maybe there'd be a menu down here, similar to this, right? Well, actually, even this is distracting now. But anyway, a menu that would pop down the side. It was a distraction, and that was generally viewed as bad. But Microsoft, being Microsoft, got away with it. Now it's become the norm. So the habits of being successful interface, you certainly have to understand the business that you're emulating. You hopefully had to understand that all the way through. I hope you get that, by the way. As a systems analyst, you have to understand the business. You want to basically maximize what graphics can do for you. And a great example of that actually comes from video games. I cannot remember the last time I read a video game manual. Almost always the video game grabs your hand and holds you through, and you start to learn how to interface between you and the game. And then both in the beginning with tutorial levels, and even to some degree, a game I don't want to drop too many game names, but like State of Decay, for example, they've actually started paying attention to the way players play their games, and they realized, I don't think some players get this. So when they designed a new layer, a new level, I should say, they actually designed it in such a way that there'd be little prompts popping up and kind of guiding the user to do what they are expecting you to do in the game to get a better experience. So what I'm trying to say is that we're long far away from people reading manuals and stuff now. Basically, any interface, whether it's video games or databases or whatever, they are basically gearing this up that you learn as you go. If you understand the business, hopefully you're thinking like the person that you're designing the thing for. I've had the benefit of being able to sit right beside a user once, and I really, as I was designing their application, and it was really good to sort of take my screen periodically, turn over and say, what do you think you would do? And this is what I would do. It's like, that's good. That's not what I was thinking you're going to do, but now I know what you're going to do with it. And then I went back and started continuing coding. Also, you don't want to surprise user at the end with a finished product. You can build a prototype. And there's a little bit of discussion at the end of the chapter on this, but a prototype is like a sort of almost a simulation of a certain aspect of the system. So you could build, actually, do I still have it up? Do I still have it up? No, I probably got rid of it. Yeah, I got rid of it. Well, that's fine. Anyway, you could build a just a couple of web pages and a couple images in the web pages, and basically tell people, hey, when you click on this, it's going to create this report. When you click on this button, it's going to go to this page. When you click on this button, a pop-up's going to show up. You're not building the application, you're building a prototype of an application. I would argue that a paper airplane is a great prototype of some dynamics of how an airplane works, or at least the wings, right? So, and then this idea of a storyboard, like the movies, you'd kind of have a story. You'd have sort of the entry screen, and then you'd basically say, when they click on this, it's going to go to this screen. When they click on this, and they could all be basically PowerPoint presentations. You can actually get pretty far in PowerPoint with some images. And the whole idea is you're focusing on how usable is this thing. You want feedback from the users, and you want to document everything. So feedback, you can get feedback verbally by just asking questions. Feedback also can be done by sitting a user down and watching them use your system and seeing what they're doing. And I always used to look for when I could see this online, I'd always look for the crinkle in the eye. Like all of a sudden, if they start doing this, I realize, I don't think my system is actually doing what it's supposed to do. So, so getting more and more feedback so you can get a more smooth user experience, that's a goal. And of course, you want to document everything, because you're not really coding everything at this point. You're creating stuff for the developers to code. That could still be you, but you're trying to create stuff for the developers to code. So you want something that's easy to learn, easy to sort of allow people to correct their mistakes. There were some of the early interfaces, if you made a mistake and you pushed a button and it would basically throw you right back to the beginning of the process, that was horrible. I'll tell you right now, by the way, I went through the IRS application to estimate how many deductions I should be taking. I went through the whole thing. I pushed a button at the end, and that was a horrible interface, even though I'm sure that they did their best. And it came back with saying I was going to get something like $2 million in as a return. And I'm kind of going, wow. I mean, that. At what point did that thing realize that maybe he made a mistake? Because I tell you, I'm not getting $2 million as a return. So so it would have been nice to at some point have that thing say, hey, are you sure that you entered in the right data, and perhaps guided me to where I made the mistake. A lot of times, by the way, now this is all common sense to you, but in the beginning we didn't actually have pop-ups with the are you sure. So when you deleted something, there wouldn't be an are you sure, it would just delete it. And now, of course, we get pop-ups to allow us to basically say, whoa, stop. Maybe we want to rethink that. And sometimes, man, you get these buttons or controls that show, and you wouldn't know what the buttons do. And that actually still is the case now. There are some things even on Google Mail or on Zoom. I'm looking at the button going, what is that button supposed to do? And I'll hover my button over top, and maybe I'll get a little bit of a label that pops up. Sometimes not. I'm going, what part of that image, that icon, is meant to demonstrate that functionality. So maybe a good example too that's not IT is thinking about street signs. When you're driving down street signs and you start seeing some signs and you're going, what is that actually supposed to mean? Having a label that's understood is a pretty important deal. All right, so I think I've talked about most of that. Your goal here, remember guidelines are still here, is to basically make your users as productive as possible. So shortcuts, appropriate tab paths, maybe graying out things that aren't necessary. Like, for example, if something's only important if they're of a certain age. Once you know what their certain age is, you can gray out certain areas that are not important. I'll tell you one thing I've had to fill out recently, not recently, but at least within the last 10 years for my citizenship. They were asking what my date of birth was, so I gave it that. But then later in there, it said that it was basically asking me, was I a member of the Nazi Party between 1939 and 1945? The two things that were interesting about that was why did they stop at 1945? Because I'm thinking would it have been okay if I joined the Nazi Party in 1946? But the other thing is that they knew my birthday. So why would you then just ask me that question? That's a dumb question, and it distracts me from what I'm trying to do, and it slows me down. So so think about that when you're designing your stuff. All right, they got some more stuff there, which I'll let you read. But the deal is, you know what is basically good to use and what's not good to use. These are actually pretty good guidelines to look at. Now, here what they've done is they've kind of designed a system. And notice, what does this look like? It looks like a functional decomposition diagram, right? But in this case, we've got a menu. And you've got the main menu. And we can imagine under the main menu, you've got customers, orders, products. And then under customers, we've got these choices. Orders, we've got these choices. Products, we've got these choices. Let me pause the video for a second and bring up something else, if I can do it. Yes, there it is. I'm going to pause the video just for a second. So what I've done here is I brought us back to that application, the one I created for the Dignity Center. You'll notice that on the PowerPoint, we had the idea of the main menu, customers, orders, products. In my case, what I've got is the main menu, which is really, there is no such thing, and then clients, experience survey, advocates. So, and you can imagine that perhaps under clients, there would be the ability to basically create a client, which again would bring us to another screen. That would be very similar to clients, create clients, and then there's another screen. So you want to kind of get control of, or at least not control, but get some, what's the word I'm looking for? Get some design going as to how is your application going to work before you start coding. Before you start coding, you want to do this, right? And then hopefully maybe there's a help. Now, I didn't put any help in this thing at all, except I think way back in the beginning, yeah, I kind of got a little bit of help as to how they can do it. But this is pretty meager, I think. And even over here, what I've tried to do in the opening screen is have some sort of discussion as to what that is, and what that is. So basically having some help would be awesome. And you want users, you want to be able to talk to the users as much as you want the users to talk to you. This is afterwards, right? So help and feedback, I think I did this, but I'll do it now anyway. I'll just create another person. I'm going to create Fredrickson. I'm going to go create client. What happens is, action process. That's horrible feedback. What would have been great is I could have gone Fred created or some kind of client message back to the person. And as far as attractive outlook and design, this whole thing here was actually a template I chose from several templates. I don't know if I'm smart enough now to go back in and show all the templates. This one was the least offensive for the ones that I actually had to look at, but this is where your web designers come in to help you with, cascade style sheets and things like that to help you basically come up with a decent looking interface. But at least, in this case, I was going for something a little bit easier on the eyes, and you know, I didn't want to like pink here, purple here, and I was actually paid attention a little bit to the fonts and stuff like that. So anyway, you want attractive stuff. Also notice, by the way, it's relatively sparse for a reason. This is all about clients. I just want the client stuff done. And I think we're not going to see it here because sadly, where did I put it? Yeah. So, because I don't have any data, but even when it came to reporting, I know I have an error there, and I'm not sure why I got the error, and I don't care. But what I wanted to show you is that, look, like even in this case, this was relatively sparse and focused on what's going on in the application. At least that's what I was trying to do. All right, so probably remember too, colors mean stuff to people, right? Like here's a pretty good example: red, yellow, and green. At least in North America, that typically red means stop, yellow means careful or slow down, not speed up, by the way, and green means to go. I said in my earlier video that you can't depend on people knowing how to use mice or having the ability to use a mouse. So what you need to do is have keys, you know, Alt F, for example, or some kind of keystroke combination to get to a particular menu command. Another thing to think about is again the tab order. Yeah, I could go on, but again, read this. This particular thing here, complex term or jargon. What I want you to think about is that you want it to be. I always was designing these things with my mother in mind. So where my mother might not know this particular piece of jargon, so why put it on there? I would say that just be aware, again, if you're thinking like a user, if your user understood what that piece of jargon would mean, go ahead and put it on. But if your user's not going to understand it, then don't. All right, starting point can be a switchboard with well-placed command buttons to navigate. Now, I didn't do a switchboard, I had that. But one of the possibilities, which I think we'll get an image, is I could have had nothing up here and just a big work pane here with basically 3 buttons and an exit. One thing I don't have here, mostly because it's a web application, is I don't actually have an exit button. Now, I didn't have an exit button because everybody knows that you can close out of it here, or you can close out of it here. But, you know, maybe it wouldn't have been a bad idea. Oh, sorry, and there's a log out here too. It might not have been a bad idea to have some kind of exit button. I just didn't think it was necessary here. But that would have been a switchboard when we're talking about a switchboard. All right. Anything else there? Not really, because I kind of talked about those. So now we're talking about other controls like the toggles, the list boxes, options, making sure like check boxes with the X's, calendar controls. So what I was doing there, getting back to Jack Daniels. Actually, I didn't use any. Oh, look! Oh, Jack lost his. Never mind. We don't care. I deleted all the data, and but I deleted the advocates, not the nothing else. Doesn't matter. No one here is going to care about this part. But if I had a checkbox, then it would look checked when I checked on it. That was kind of what they're trying to say there. And then if the date's got to be entered using a calendar control, that's what I was trying to do with these things. This is a calendar control, right? And so here's sort of an example of their system. It's not super attractive, by the way. I'm not a big fan of the gray or whatever, but notice there's a big bold button there. You know what that's going to do when you click on it. If you click on this, it'll bring you up to this search. So anyway, understand this is far from perfect, but a couple neat things to talk about. When to use a checkbox versus a radio button. So a radio button is great for either or. Checkboxes are great for did it happen or not, or is it true or not. So either or true or not. Now, I would say this, right? I've had this argument with students for a long time. And I actually listen to you guys, so I've been thinking about it some more. But here's the thing: you could argue that full-time could have been a checkbox because it seems to be either full-time or part-time. And what we would do is, if it was checked, we would assume part-time, but I hope you can see already that that's kind of gross from a user interface perspective. Here we're forcing someone to basically go, it's full-time, part-time. Now these two up here, if we basically were okay with the default being unchecked, and then someone would actually have to check on it, that's a slightly different feeling, and that would be a good time to use a button. So, or sorry, a checkbox. So, you know, for example, did that person graduate? Would it be good to have a yes or no radio button or a checkbox? I personally think, did that person graduate? Yes, with the checkbox. That would be better than a yes or no. That's the way I think. Some of you might disagree with that, and this is where it gets to the flavor of personalities. However, one thing to think about is, how is this application working within the other applications? You kind of want your shop, your group, to come up with a fairly standard way of dealing with interfaces like that or controls like that. So keep that in mind anyway when you're choosing these kind of choices. Now, what else did I want to say about that? Yeah, I guess they don't really have a date or anything here, but as I brought up before, like, how would the person know that that is the format of the social security number? They might not know that. So you could, in theory, have even that information in there as sort of a hint as to, this is how I want the social security number, this is how I want the phone numbers. Believe it or not, I almost sabotaged my entry into Blue Cross when I was filling out the intake forms, because for my phone number, I put my area code dot, whatever the other thing is, 3 digits, dot, and then the rest of it. And the dots were enough to screw up the system, so that I had to go back in. I actually was getting a recruiter telling me, go back in and change it because they can't process your application. That's the kind of stuff. And by the way, Blue Cross is pretty decent, and they still had mistakes like that in their systems. So there's nothing in there telling me that I couldn't put the dots, and nothing in there that took my phone number and formatted it like this. So that was kind of I think a failing in that interface. So focusing on data entry, focus on data entry screens. So form filling methods. So what does that mean? If you put New Hope, it'd be nice if that state was put in, assuming you could predict the state. I'm trying to think. Well, we're going to give us, no, you're not going to give us examples. But anyway, if your fields can start guessing what their values are based on what's happening in the form, that would be pretty good. So, you know, if you remember back here when I created this thing, and I create myself a new client, right? It assumes today's date, right? It assumes today's date. That's form filling. All right. Anyway, for those of you that are going to go on afterwards and have a look at this thing, understand this is not perfect. This was just basically meant as something to talk about. So I'm saying that because I'm looking at, you know, descriptive captions would have been awesome. A way to leave without entering the current record, which we do have that, by the way. I mean, that's actually here. If I wanted to, there's my way to leave if I wanted to back out, and add, delete, change records. I tried to make it so my form layout did match the source document. I designed that form long before I started teaching this course, by the way. So way to go for me. Having a nice sample masks for things like dates or social security numbers or phone numbers. What else here is important? Default values. Having an opportunity to confirm. Like, one thing that would have been good here, if I would have got create, and I would have just given this guy a name. Okay, and then if I go create, it would have been nice to have the, are you sure you want to create? Because now I've got this guy in here, even if I don't want him, right? Also, even up here, by the way, one of the things I'm noticing is this, there's no easy way to get rid of Pilot now. I actually have to go into Pilot and delete Pilot. And if this is one of those moments where I've got to delete a whole bunch of people, that's going to slow me down. A good interface for this would be to have a bunch of checks, click on it, and just you know, delete the people I want to delete. Most web applications I've seen have got that kind of idea in them now. All right, so here's some input masks and some sort of descriptions. So definitely look over those. So the validation rule. So I brought up the idea of the field, the record, and the data set. Here they're showing you different types of rules, like the sequence check, which is does this thing have to be in a particular sequence? So if you're putting in an order number, for example, if you're actually typing it in, and the order number has to be greater than the one before, then that number better be greater than the one before. Checking to see, is that field populated? Is it the right data type? Is it within a certain range? We didn't talk about that too much, but is there a range? I would argue that the range here of of the intake date, maybe we could have that as a range of any time in the last month. The business process here was that someone would fill out this piece of paper and set an inbox. So maybe it isn't necessarily prudent to think it will happen the day it's actually entered, but it is prudent to say it's going to happen maybe within the calendar year, maybe, or within a year of it being entered, or not a year. It could be within a year of it being of the intake taking place. So that'd be sort of a range check. So is it actually reasonable? So that's hard to talk about in the case of this, but yeah, I'll just let it stand on its own there. And then the combination. This is where I was talking about having it sort of a record level. Like maybe the field itself, field A is fine, field B is fine, but together they are not fine. And the example I gave there was the city and the state. All right. So here's a couple validations, which is fine. Okay. If you know your SQL, by the way, which we'll be talking about in the next, well, a couple videos away, that's what this is kind of about. All right. So this stuff here is, again, trying to reduce. You don't want them to have to type in everything if you can basically do it for them. So you'll notice that in here, there's no concept of a client number. The client number is behind the scenes. I don't bother displaying it because it's controlled behind the scenes. I don't necessarily control, I don't force the user to enter in that they are the one entering this in. I know who the user is, and I just basically store that information behind the scenes. So that's what I'd say to that. There's our garbage in, garbage out, and there's a lot of focus, I think, sometimes on getting good information out, but not enough focus on getting good information in, and that's where this chapter focuses. So that's kind of important. And here is sort of giving you a reasonable example of what a form could look like, right? So you got like a heading, a control, that'd be your sort of, cancel, okay kind of area. What is the form about? And then the actual form itself, if there's any totals. Maybe, for example, you're entering in orders and at the end there's going to be a total. That'd be kind of there. This is just sort of a guideline. Now, when it comes to output, I love how the book, even now, even in this latest version, is still talking about printed output. A lot of output, of course, is going to come on the screen, but you know what? There's some lessons here we can get even from printed output too, right? Because we've all seen reports up on a browser that you just look at them and go, man, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I wish they'd actually thought about how people would read this form. I certainly have seen that. So you want to think about, this is like almost a W5, like why, who, what, especially. Why are we printing these out? Who wants it? Why is it needed? And how is it going to be used? What should be in the report? So you only put in the report what should be in the report. Is this going to actually come out just as printed, or is it going to come out as printed and then go somewhere else? Or if it's not printed, by the way, is the output going to get dumped off as a comma delimited file to be sucked in by something else that's maybe expecting a tab delimited file? Those are the kind of things you got to think about there. And for goodness sakes, especially now, one of the reasons I cleared all that data is because you got personally identifiable information concerns. There is HIPAA concerns, all sorts of concerns about data, and you don't want to give people access to data they shouldn't have access to, and you certainly don't want them to be able to export data they shouldn't have access to. In Oracle, when they were getting ready to fire a salesperson, one of the first things that would come across my desk is please freeze Fred's access to this system, because Fred would be likely, upon finding out he was terminated, to basically quickly do a dump of all his clients and then run over to SAP and basically try to steal them, I guess, is what was going on there. So, so you got to be aware of that kind of stuff. So here they're going to talk a little bit about report design, and I'll let you read most of that on your own. But I do want you to understand this is not a bad idea. Nope. Okay, so I would argue there's 4 types of reports. No, 3. They're all here. You got the detail, which is obviously mostly used for operational reporting. I would argue that this guy here sort of starts to create a detail. It's not really a detailed report, but if there was actually like number of children's and these are all check boxes and things like that, that would be a pretty decent detail report. Exception reports, things that have gone wrong and you want them to come out as a report, like maybe orders that don't have any order lines, for example, or you should never get this, but an order line without an order. Or maybe exception reports can be things like products that haven't been ordered in 50 days, right? So that would be sort of an exception report. And then summary reports are typically things like sales. This is where I did most of my stuff. Sales over time, compared this year over last year. That would be sort of a nice little summary report. So you definitely want to get users involved, and you want to basically, before you code anything, sit in Excel and produce a crap report and have them look at it and say, is this what you want, right? And then that artifact, by the way, will go and be documented so that you know that everyone agreed that that's what they want. So if you're doing a report on cat litter and you're trying to sort of show cat litter usage over time, and you then give this thing totally made up data, or maybe they already have existing reports, by the way, too. But either way, you present that to the users. They say yes, and then you know, right when you're done, they say, wait a minute, there's nothing here on dog litter, or there's nothing here on projecting cat litter over time. You can say, well, actually, that wasn't really in the mock-up, and then at that point, you renegotiate and find out, well, what, you know, how do you want to move forward? Most reports have a header and a footer, and again, it's back to being printed, but a report header, report footer, a page header, a page footer. And then basically at this point, you've just got a constant string of lines. So there you go. So there's a report header, probably a report footer. And then you get this guy for the page. And then individual details and subtotals. All right, so don't totally glaze over because it looks like a printed report. A lot of the times the stuff I've had to work on looks just like this, except it just happens to be on the screen in front of me. Now, a few things that you will see, and they don't talk about it, but you'll see sometimes group sorting where basically if store 8, we don't need to see 8 every single time. So sometimes it'll just blank it out. We'll see 8 for the first row, and then everything else will be blank. What I would have been tempted to do with this is put the position to the left of employee, because then we could have done the same kind of thing here. We could have sorted by, depending on what, again, I'm not thinking like the users. I don't know what they're looking for. But if they were looking to see basically the store by position by employee, then I would have basically put the position on the left and put the employee over here. If they're looking to see who's the one who's been working the most or who's got the most overtime, you know, those kind of sort orders are important. Anyway, then you got basically what they call a control break. In this case, the control break must be on store. Right, and then we got little subtotals. So when we talk about SQL, I'll quickly just throw out something that an SQL can do this, but depending on the technology, you're going to want to look for words like control break, group sort, those kind of things. All right, and here they'll just talk about other ways. So we just in theory talked about printed stuff. So now we can talk about things like, you know, getting your stuff through emails, blogs, text, and so on. The stuff that we did at Oracle, you definitely had things called agents, and agents would basically fire off sometimes consistent reports like once a day to certain people. Or by the way, these agents were pieces of software. I should point that out. They weren't people. Or the other thing an agent could do is look for a particular situation in the data. Like if, for example, a particular file was empty, which should never have happened, then what would happen is the agent would fire off a quick panic message to us so that we jump on it and get it fixed. So I mean, that's not so much a report, but more of a notification. And then I know on my phone, thanks to all this COVID stuff, I'm getting plenty of messages showing up through text, and like like these things, which you probably can't see. But anyway, I'm aware that sometimes some of these agents can certainly shoot things out off to other environments as well. So, all right, and then I'll just faxing too is in there, and also remember too that computers can in theory talk to each other as well. So we'll just let that go over you, and and when I'm talking about some of this stuff, this is interesting what they're talking about here, but I don't know, just I guess just being aware of how technology is evolving, and the way that we are interfacing with our systems is definitely evolving. I'm going to be the last person to sign on to that because I don't trust them. The last thing I need to have is some kind of general protection fault happen to my brain. I've got enough problems. All right. Is there anything else I want to talk about with this? This is just talking about stuff coming in, which I don't want to talk about. And then as far as like the securities and stuff, yeah. Again, I'll just let you look over that. And here they're talking about prototyping. And the thing about prototyping, again, that was important. Notice how kind of iterative it is. You plan your prototype, have your analysis, design it, let people see what you've done, and then get the feedback, which comes into the planning, and it, again, builds and builds like this. Very similar, by the way, to Agile to some degree. And I've already talked about this probably live, but I'll just say again that the benefits of prototyping is that it does actually speed things up. You have a good idea where what the system actually wants. But the problem I find, the problem is that especially for complicated things, the prototype itself is going to be too complicated to use. Prototyping can also, by the way, skewer the expectations of the people expecting it. So once they see the prototype, they kind of go, "Ooh, well, what? You're obviously almost done. When can I have it?" And my comment to that is that what this thing here is a prototype of a Jeep, and it does stuff like I can see how it wheels and all sorts. And I can see apparently it has a hood that goes up, and I can look at the engine. But if someone saw this, they wouldn't be saying, "Okay, well, when can you drive that? Take that off-roading?" Because this is just a prototype. And I wish people would understand, especially upper management, that that's basically what prototypes are. You do not typically want to make your prototype the actual finished product. Typically, you don't. It happens a lot, but you don't want that to happen. All right. Good deal. So we're done with that chapter, and then I'll start talking about the actual